Where the bands are. 5 months later, I'd beaten my Western Auto special half to death. My fingers were strong and calloused. My fingertips were as hard as an armadillo's shell. I was ready to mow up. I had to go electric. I explained to my mother that to get in a band, to make a buck, to get anywhere, I needed an electric guitar. Once again, that would cost money we didn't have. $18 wasn't going to cut it this time. In my room I had a cheesy pool table I'd gotten the Christmas before when I planned to follow in my father's footsteps as a pool shark. I got pretty decent playing in the basement of the Y on canteen nights, but I never got good enough to challenge my old man. However, it still was good cover to get my girlfriends up into my bedroom. Once I'd romanced them to the bed, I'd lean up once in a while and toss the pool balls across the table to keep the old man happy down in the kitchen. But by now the thrill was gone. Christmas was coming. I made a deal with my mom. If I'd sell the pool table, she'd try to come up with a balance for an electric guitar. I spotted in the window of Kaizo music store on Center Street. The price was $69, and it came complete with a small amplifier. It was the cheapest they had, but it was a start. I sold my pool table for $35. A guy tied it to the roof of his car and headed out the drive. So there on one slashy Christmas Eve, I stood with my mother staring into Kaizo's window at a sunburst, one pickup can guitar made in Japan. It looked beautiful, wondrous, and affordable. I had my $35 and my mother had $35 of finance company money. She and my father borrowed from season to season, paying off their debt just in time to borrow again. $69 would be the biggest expenditure of my life, and my mother was going out on a limb for me one more time. In we went. Mr. Kaizo lifted it out of the window and stuck it into leather at a cardboard case, and we drove home with my first electric guitar. In the living room I plunged in my new amp. Its teeny 6-inch speaker roared to life. It sounded awful, distorted beyond all recognition. The amp had one control, a volume knob. It was about the size of a large bread box, but I was in the game. My guitar was cheap as they came, but compared it to the junker I'd been playing, it was a Cadillac. The strings were smooth found. Their distance to the fretboard was minimal and allowed for easy intonation with the slightest pressure. I got better fast and was soon meeting at a friend's house for jam sessions. I knew a drummer, Donny Powell. We convened in his living room while his parents were out and made the most god-awful racket you ever heard. Being able to play a little was one thing, playing together was something else. uncharted territory. The one tune every aspiring axeman struggled to master in those days was Bill Dodgett's Honky Tonk. It was unbelievable, rudimentary, theoretically within the grasp of the most spastic idiot, and the hit record. Honky Tonk was a two-string blues concerto, a low-down dirty stripper's groove, and is still a cool record today. Donny, the drummer, taught it to me, and the two of us hacked at it like axe murderers. Years before the White Stripes, the two of us beat the crap out of the blues, except we stunk singing. Into what? With what? No one had a microphone or a voice. It was just way below garage level thrashing, lasting all night long until his parents came home. We called ourselves the Merchants. A few other neighborhood kids came in. There were few more exuberant, painful rehearsals, and then the day was done. It was finished, and back to my room I went. But there was one kid in the neighborhood who could really play. He'd taken a few years of guitar lessons. His dad was a successful businessman. He had Gibson guitar, a real instrument, and a real amp. He knew how to read music. I spoke to him and drafted him into revamped Merchants, now called Rogers, freehold version, not to be confused with the later Shore version, consisting of actual playing, singing musicians. Suddenly, we sounded close to music. My amp was joke, so he let me plug into the spare channel of his. We even found a bass player, well, someone who had a bass and, more important, another amp. He joined our combo. He couldn't play, but he was a nice, handsome Italian kid, and his friendship would literally sail my ass from beating years into the future in a funky little backwoods dive down Route 9 called the IB Club. We plunged on, rehearsing semi-regularly, with one radical and rebellious idea. Someone would sing. Showtime. In small town Jersey in 1964, no one sang. There were vocal groups with backing bands. There were bands with no vocalist, who performed strictly instrumentals, taking the Venturis as their guiding light. But there were no self-contained playing, singing combos. That was one of the revolutions the Beatles brought with them when they came to America. You wrote the songs, you sang the songs, you played the song. Before that, a typical local band's set list would consist of Pipeline by the Shantays, Sleep Walk by Santo and Johnny, Apache, Out of Limits, Penetration, Haunted Castle, all purely instrumental pieces. In the early 60s, at high school dance, a top hometown band like the Chevilles would play all night, unmiked, without word being uttered to the audience of frenetic dancers. The Chevellies were the instrumental kings of our local scene, challenged up Route 9 by the Victorians. They were real musician teachers at my Tial's music school with good equipment and matching suits. One day our young combo heard of Sunday matinee shows for teenagers at a Freehold Elks Club. It cost 35 cents to come in, and all the bands played for free to a crowd of about 75 locals. The show was run by an unusual husband and wife team of entertainers, Bingo Bob and Mrs. Bob. They were a circus act and a little on the freaky side, but for a few months, until someone stole one of Mrs. Bob's maracas and Bingo launched into psycho fury, locking us all in the Elks Club until someone pulled a maraca out of their ass. It was a good place for your first baptism by fire. The almost strictly instrumental bands would set up in a circle and square off for a few hours. With anxiety somewhere around pre-Super Bowl levels, my bandmates and I loaded our gear into our parents' cars, hauled it down to the Elks and set up. Being the newest group, we went on last. We spun through our tunes, Panic and Cold Sweet aside, we weren't bad. Then we released our secret weapon, me singing, Twist and Shoot. I blared my way through it, putting on the ship-shaking show of my young life, or so I thought. There was a huge girl 40s style microphone plunged into the Elks' few horrible squawk box speakers which passed for a sound system. I hid behind the big microphone and screamed my head off. Ah, 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 well, shake it up, baby now. An embarrassing performance, but I felt pretty good about it. Some kids even told us we sounded great. I thought almost everyone else was better than us. They had nicer equipment, more experience, but barely anyone sang. From there we were booked at high school dance opening for the Chevellies. Being booked to play at your high school was the top gig in town. It was a risky booking for us. That night we went down to the deals and rented an extra Gretsch amplifier with reverb that magic echo chamber that seemed to make you immediately sound like all your favorite records and lent an air of professionalism to what you were doing. Down to the Freehold Regional High School Gymnasium we went. We were going to blow the sheet music out of the Chevellies and send them and their fancy music lessons crying back to Mike Deal's music school. We were the new wave. No matching suits, no music school, just blues, shooting and rock and roll. Trouble began almost immediately. Our lead guitarist had forgotten his guitar strap, so he had to play the entire set with one knee propped up on his amp, supporting his guitar. Not cool. Also, unfortunately, our bass player remained unable as of yet to play a note, so he stood, knee up, no strap either, on his amp, the one that got him in the band, with his bass turned firmly off for the evening. I brayed into the high school public address system microphone, and the nightmare of unintelligible sound poured forth from somewhere in the rafters of the gymnasium. What was even worse, we were so excited about acquiring a reverb, my lead guitarist and I plunged into our rented amp, turned the reverb on full and reduced our sound to quick, quivering, echoing mesh, cheese ball, shitstorm of submerged instrumentation that sounded like it was being picked up from the bottom of some dragon-infested ocean. Our new effect reduced whatever we were playing to meandering gibberish. Full reverb in a high school gymnasium. Don't try it, young ones. It was humiliating. You could tell as it was going by. I stood there, head down, red-faced, knowing we sounded awful and without a clue as to what to do about it. The crowd huddled close in front of our band, expecting something. We'd been bragging all week. Their faces told the story. What the f? Then the Chivilies came on and smoked. They were professionals. They played real music, as boring and corny as it was. They knew how to control their instruments and perform before a crowd. We stood there watching, newly humbled, with few die-hard pals telling us we weren't so bad. We went back to the drawing board, except this time I'd end up there alone. I was informed shortly after our gig by my pal, the guy I'd brought into the band, that I'd been watted out. My guitar was too cheap and wouldn't stay in tune, and he unnecessarily added that he'd seen the same piece of junk in New York City for $30. Oh, that hurt. I told my mom that day as I walked her home from work that I'd been kicked out of the band, but I didn't have the heart to tell her why. She'd anted up everything she had for that piece of junk, and I was going to make it work.